What's up, friends? Welcome to the first ever episode of Immersion Unlocked, a show all about looking under the hood of our favorite games and stories and seeing what makes them so captivating and immersive. We're going to talk to game devs, story writers, music composers, sound designers, anyone who plays a part in giving us an adventure to get lost in, and we're going to learn their takes, tips, and tricks on creating an immersive experience for their players. For our first ever episode, I am very grateful to have gotten to interview my good friend Clinton Hughes. Clinton is a brilliant game developer and a creative powerhouse. He's currently working on a massive sci-fi horror epic called CRISPR. I have had the pleasure of helping Clinton build the soundtrack for that game, and just experiencing the way his brain sees story and world building and the way that process works for him has been a lot of fun for me. In this episode, Clinton shares some really interesting insights on grounding your game in reality and how giving your players something to relate to can really make your game world real to them. Lots of cool stuff to learn from Clinton, so without further ado, let's hop into the episode.
All right, we are live. So what's up, dude? Welcome in. Tell us who you are.
Yeah, how's it going, dude? So my name's Clinton Hughes, and I am a game developer and animator. So I grew up in Kansas City and went to the Kansas City Art Institute for animation. And then after that, I got a job working at a VR place and started doing a little bit of game dev and just kind of kept following it.
Nice. So I know from having known you for, a little while now, you are a man of many creative talents and many different disciplines. You do some music, you do animation, you have like a somewhat of like a engineering background, you skateboard, like there's all kinds of crazy stuff. So
Yeah.
Was animation the first like art form you picked up on?
So actually, I went to college first for graphic design.
Okay.
I've always been like an artist, ever since I was little. I was, doing drawings and sculpting and stuff like that. But I thought, graphic design would be an easy kind of like, way into like getting like a, industry job because it's so kind of prevalent. Everyone needs a graphic designer.
Right.
So I went to Johnson County Community College for that, and it went good. But kind of midway through it, I was like starting to dabble with like animation, kind of learning 3D like software, and I kind of fell in love with it. And then I kind of just like, it's like, oh, well, I guess I'm going to go pursue animation now. So
Yeah.
yeah.
What was the influence in terms of animation? Like I know a lot of people in the animation world that are obviously very like Dragon Ball Z and anime influenced and stuff like that. It seems to be the most common thread. I haven't met too many people that were in the Disney camp. Well, obviously they exist, but they seem to be more rare to meet out in public.
No, for sure. So actually, like the movie that got me started is right there.
Okay.
Jurassic Park. So seeing that growing up and like the amazing kind of 3D dinosaurs that they had in that movie kind of is what first kind of inspired me to like, or not inspired me, but like influenced me and kind of developed my love for animation.
Okay.
And of course, like Dragon Ball Z too. I grew up, like getting home from school and watching that, and I love that as well. Rest in peace, Toriyama.
Right.
But yeah, so I've been a huge lover of film and animation, like my entire life.
That's interesting that Jurassic Park is the one you go to, because like if I remember correct me if I'm wrong, I'm definitely not a film buff, but Jurassic Park was like hailed for it mostly being practical effect, right?
Right. So like what's really special about that movie is how they blended like practical and the 3D animation.
Okay.
And like the 3D for the time was done so well that like you couldn't tell really when they would swap between the two.
To the point of me, I had no idea that there was any animation involved.
Oh, totally. Like most of the like the close-ups on like the car when Lex and Tim, like the truck gets flipped over. So that's like the animatronic, but then like when it's first like kind of escaping from its exhibit, like that's all like CG, and when it's like chasing after them, like after the car with Ian in the back, that's CG, and yeah.
Cool, man. Sick.
Mm-hmm.
So then where was the pivot point for you? You're into animation, you love the animation. Where did it turn into, I'm going to get into video games versus going and working for a film studio and animating or doing something like that route?
Right. So there's a couple things that happened, kind of that all kind of fed into that. The first thing I would say is I played a game called Bloodborne.
Oh
Very
yeah.
heard of
Oh
it.
yeah.
Incredible game. And when I played that, I was in kind of like a rough spot in my life. I had, graduated from school. I had my animation degree, but there isn't much opportunity for jobs in Kansas where I live. I tried applying, in places like LA and like in Canada, and just nothing would,
Right.
follow through.
I imagine remote work was much more scarce at that point. That was long pre-COVID.
For sure. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy how COVID's changed everything.
Right.
But so I played that game like kind of like at a really like it came to me at the right time, and that game just like immersed me like entirely. And I was really depressed at the time, and even though it's like a really dark and kind of brooding game where it should have made me depressed, it like had the opposite effect on me where I just fell in love with it, got totally immersed, and it kind of changed my life, my whole perspective on video games. And I was like I love this, and like I want to create something that's going to do what it did for me for someone
Mhm.
else.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love that experience. And you're segueing perfectly into what I want this whole podcast to be about, because you use that word immersion a couple times. What,
Mhm.
in the sense of Bloodborne in general, we'll get into the weeds in a second. What does that mean to you? What is that quality of immersion to you?
So like I thought about this, and so I think what immersion is, it's all these different elements coming together and melding with each other to kind of like allow you to slip out of this reality and exist within another reality, and to just kind of it's escapism. But it's like
Hmm.
it's a lot of different factors. Like you have your sound design, and like you have your soundtrack. You have like the story, and it's just like the atmosphere, and it's like everything just kind of like melding together, as I said. And I feel like there's certain like things that just like are more important than others in terms. I was actually talking to my wife, I think it was like a couple of days ago, and we were talking about the movie Interstellar,
Okay.
and I was like, can you imagine like that movie without the soundtrack that's accompanying it? It would be a completely different movie.
Right. Right.
It kind of came up because I stumbled across a YouTube video where someone covers like the docking sequence with a kazoo. It's like they got the assignment and they nailed it. Like they did the song on kazoo, but like it totally broke the immersion. It was not the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm reading a book right now by a music composer, Winifred Phillips. She worked on God of War and Assassin's Creed 3, very established composer. And the
Mhm.
book is on, it's just game audio for composers, but like I'm like 200 pages in. She hasn't talked about music at all. It's purely been about
Wow.
immersion and triggering flow state, and how like that's the goal for any sound designer, music composer, really game developer.
Yeah.
Um and she describes it. It's kind of what sparked this podcast and this whole rabbit hole for me on learning more about immersion. But the way she describes it is like it's a psychological forgetting of self. Like it's a state that we fall into where we forget that we exist. We are simply
Yeah.
floating in this other universe.
For
And
sure.
Interstellar is a great example of it, because there's so many. What I love about Interstellar, especially the score, obviously Hans Zimmer can do no wrong, but like
Right.
it's a very, if you break down the theory of that and like the actual parts that are being played, it's a very
Mhm.
simple score. I mean, the whole like main theme is two notes at a time, but
Mhm.
it's so fitting to kind of stimulate that emotional feeling of like confusion and like lack of time. There's just so much
Yeah.
in it that creates like it triggers the emotions for you, so you don't have to actively do it, and you kind of disappear into that story.
For sure.
Freaking awesome example. You said that there are some things that are more important. I'd be interested on your take on what those things are.
Oh, totally. Like, I mean, so obviously, like I say, like the music is super important. But then also like story, like having. So like my favorite movies of all time, I kind of I can kind of show you. Got Jurassic Park, you got Star Wars. There's Aliens, there's Terminator 2.
Okay.
But one thing that all those movies have in common is that they have a protagonist that you want to root for.
Yeah,
Like
for sure.
like someone that you actually care about, and by by following this character, you're kind of like vicariously going on the journey with them. And like if you don't have like a character that you care about, then you don't care about like the actual like whatever it is, whatever media you're consuming.
Yeah, for
Like,
sure.
mhm,
Do
like
you
go ahead.
do you have any? Oh no, go ahead. I want to hear what you, because I'm about to change. I'm about to pivot directions.
Very good. Like I just thought of like think of something like horror movies, right? Like a Jason or like a Freddy Krueger, right? Where like the main character in those movies, like, sure, I know there's some fans of them that like really care about them, but like for the most part, like you don't, like, they're kind of cannon fodder. Like you don't really care
Right.
if they die
Right.
that much. And so for me, I'm not as immersed into the movie because of that. It's like investment as well as immersion.
Yeah, that's actually interesting to build on that, because like that implies that there is a quality of immersion where it's market specific, because you could argue that
Oh, sure.
Friday the 13th could be super immersive if you're sensitive to that kind of like, oh, someone's behind me kind of feeling. I, for one, am not a horror movie person. I find life stressful enough. I don't need that in my world. But I can definitely acknowledge, immersion being a quality of like, I feel scared. I'm obviously not in the movie, but I feel super tense and unnerved. So in a way that they're succeeding in that. So there's like I guess different ways to capture it.
Oh, for sure.
Did you give thought when you were in animation, you were already a fan of like Jurassic Park and you knew you wanted to do something like that, but pre-game dev, did you ever give much thought to this sort of quality of needing a viewer or an audience to be lost in your creation?
Oh, for sure. Like, so even before I did like the animation and the game dev, I would up, since I'm like a creative person, I like just try to explore different kind of outlets. So I was even dabbling with like special effects work, like for kind of short videos. And so me and my friend Robert, we did a couple of short films. Um, they're kind of embarrassing looking back on them
Hey
now.
man.
But like just like in terms of like how do we approach filming these things so that like the audience will be immersed into this.
Yeah.
Like I made like a short film where I did special effects for portals. So the video is just me going around my house. Like I discovered that there's portals in my house, right? And so I'm like, checking out all these different portals. Like, oh, I wonder if this filing cabinet has a portal in it. And then I'll like stick my hand through it and grab something out of it, right? And it ends with like my head coming out of a toilet bowl and getting stuck. But like, there's just like a thought process. Like, how do you frame the content of whatever it is you're filming? Like, do you do like a wide angle? Do you do like a Dutch angle to kind of add some tension to it? Stuff like that.
Kind of trying to find ways to creatively hint at the viewer what they're supposed to be thinking and feeling, so they don't have to do it. That's kind of how I've started to see it. Has your take on what it means to immerse your audience, has that changed at all since getting into game dev? Seeing as it's a much more like, as a consumer, playing a video game versus watching a film is a much more active sense of consumption. Like I'm actually part of it. So in creating that art form, has your outlook on immersion changed at all?
Oh, definitely. So with video games, like, like as you said, it's kind of a more active kind of thing that the audience is doing. And so instead of like you have less control, like you do like a movie, right? If you want to
Hmm.
like frame an action in a certain way, you can do that through like cutscenes and stuff. But for the most part of the game, they're just going to be walking around or in combat and stuff like that. And so in terms of like video game immersion, it's all about world building. Like what do I want to put inside the world for the player to discover, and how am I going to kind of cookie, crumb, leave like cookie crumbs for the player to kind of follow.
Hmm.
And and stuff like that could be like a notepad that the player finds that someone left behind, or it's like you find like a dead body, but it's in a weird location. How did it get there? And it kind of you keep
Hmm.
that intrigue. And so it's a different kind of approach, um, but I find it like they're both equally as effective in what you can do to kind of influence the audience's feelings.
Yeah. So you work a lot to, because I've seen the way you've already mapped out the storyboard for CRISPR,
Mhm.
and it's mind blowing to me the level of detail you've gone into before like even actually putting pen to paper for all of that stuff. So
Mhm.
obviously you place a huge emphasis on sparking that player's curiosity of what else went on prior to even the game I play, even if it has you have
Mhm.
no intention of putting the player through these experiences. You want to leave rabbit holes for me to go through mentally, right?
Right.
Like, oh, why is
Mhm.
why is this character like this, or why, or how did this happen this way, that kind of thing.
Mhm. Oh, for sure. Like, so for me, I like before I, started developing CRISPR, like I just lived in the world in my head for like a long time, like, I built this world and I'm living in it and I'm, charting things out, like what were the events that happened in this world, because it takes place like 25 years in the future, like the climate's starting to kind of degrade, and like the weather phenomenon's getting worse. And so like how would humanity kind of react in that situation,
Right.
like if like resources became scarce, or how would we adapt as people, to kind of fit this evolving environment. And so like I just existed in that world. And I was kind of funny because like at the time where I was starting to kind of think of it in my head, my wife she's a scientist, and she was in school, and they were talking about CRISPR. She was learning about CRISPR in school.
Okay.
And like and so it kind of just like it kind of dawned on me that's like, oh well, if if humanity's in this situation and we need to adapt quickly, what better way is there to do that than with CRISPR? Because it's a biological, you can manipulate the genes of people and different organisms. And so I thought, like, what a perfect kind of way to kind of like frame the story, or kind of like give an explanation as to the events of my story and how they play out,
Yeah. Right. Right.
And it's like, and what's really cool, like, is that when I started the project, I knew for certain I didn't want to do zombies because everyone does zombies, and I love zombies, but that's not something that I want to do. I want to do something original. And like I feel like there's this whole world of different kinds of organisms that people have never seen before, kind of deep sea creatures like the mimic octopus,
Hmm.
or like microscopic creatures like a tardigrade. Like I wonder how many people actually know what a tardigrade is.
Right.
And I thought that this would be a cool way to kind of introduce that to people, like show whole different like side of horror, that no one's
Yeah.
seen before.
There's actual real monsters in our actual world that we have
Oh,
no idea
totally.
exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What, for instance, like, do you know what a lamprey is?
I've heard the term. I'm pretty sure I'd recognize the picture, but it's a
Yeah.
fish, right?
It's a fish, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fish, but it's like so it's like a parasitic fish, and literally it's just like a mouth that is just lined with razor sharp teeth, and
Yep.
it's just like a tail, and it latches on, but it's like nightmare fuel,
Yeah, little real life rancor pit.
Yeah, totally.
Dude, that's so legit though. Like, I could be wrong on the statistic, but I remember reading like we've only explored like 10% of the ocean. The other 90% is still completely alien to us, and
Mhm.
the stuff that we've seen in the 10% is, like you said, already nightmare
Right.
fuel.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's so cool that that's your take on how you've built the atmosphere of CRISPR, is that it's rooted in reality. I think that's kind of an underlying fact of all of my favorite stories and games and movies, all the ones that really got me involved,
Yeah.
were things that stemmed from a place of like that's legit. Like that could be real. That's not
Right.
that's possible that I could experience that in my lifetime, you know?
Yeah, for sure. It's like, I mean, obviously I'm taking liberties with like the creature designs and I'm like, pushing them, but it's like the technology actually exists, and this type of scenario isn't unfeasible,
Right.
So, like I wanted to kind of have that kind of string that's attached to reality.
Right.
Mm.
That So I wrote down a question that I think tails on this really well. Do you have any, because I have one branching from this conversation, but I want to hear your take. Do you have any pet peeves in video games or movies or stories in general, like instant immersion breakers for you, where you're like, oh, it just ruined the entire experience for me?
Right. So there's a couple, like so for video games, like the biggest one is an invisible wall.
Okay.
Right? Because like in video games, you want to have the freedom to explore, because like you're immersed in the world, and like you see a mountain off in the distance, and you're like, oh, I want to go check that out, but then you hit an invisible wall, and it's just like, like,
You can't give me something.
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's one, and then what's interesting with the video games, there's the like the immersion breaker that's just kind of inherent in video games, where it's like video game bugs,
Yeah.
where it's like, okay, like I was talking to this NPC, but now his head's spinning 360 degrees, and now he's ragdolling. And so that's definitely like immersion shattering. And I guess in terms of like other media, like movies and stuff, it's like dialogue that like someone would not, like a real person wouldn't say in that sort of situation.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah. Like
like
just
their friend just,
unbelievably out of character stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Dude,
Those are the biggest ones for me.
because for me, building on our talk of like grounding and realism, my wife hates me for this. We very rarely watch movies, especially sci-fi movies together, because I'm bad about this. But like, I am such a neckbeard when it comes to like uh incongruent like physics or something, or like the rules changing in a story, where at the beginning of the story, all let's explosions can't happen for whatever reason, but then at the very end of the movie, oh, now they just threw a grenade and they're safe now. It's like that doesn't line up. And so I could be watching a movie like Dune, where I'm like, I'm totally fine with the skyscraper-sized worm flying around and all, like that's all cool. I'm in it. But if one person like can suddenly breathe without a mask or something like that, it's like that doesn't make any sense. That pisses me off.
Right.
So I love that we talked about grounding and realism, because I think for me that's such a critical point in achieving that immersive, that flow state, that like getting lost in it, is when like everything makes sense to me, because this is technically possible, at least technically possible within the grounds that you've established for me.
Right.
You know what I mean? Even if we're in a fantasy world, if we're in Star Wars and we've got the Force, like I'm totally cool with that, but let's make it accurate. It took Luke Skywalker 3 movies to learn one Force move, and Rey picks it up in like 20 minutes. That really bothered me.
Oh, it bothered me too. No, for sure. It's like I feel like it's so important. Like if when you're creating like a universe, it's like you want to set the rules, up front, and then also like stick to them.
Yeah.
It's like this is how it works because once you, and it's okay to like evolve upon it, over time, but like only in a way that kind of makes sense,
Right. You have as a dev, actually, I wanted to ask you too, because you've got
Mhm.
that I know of two projects that I've watched you do. You've got CRISPR, and then you've got the arena mech ball thing that you started, which
Mhm.
also looked really fun. Both of which are very different types of experiences. CRISPR is obviously a very built world, story driven type of project, versus the other
Yeah.
one is more of just a PvP kind of let's have a good time together thing.
Mhm.
But you still need to achieve that level of I'm getting lost in myself playing a game like that, where there's no story, it's just all gameplay.
Right.
Can you talk to the differences of what you kind of focus on in terms of making it captivating for the player?
Right. So like with Mecha Ball Arena, like I feel like the immersion is coming with like it's kind of tied to the gameplay itself,
Hmm.
because it's like it's almost like a sports type of game, right?
Hmm.
So I have like the location set like there's one where it's going to be like at a moon base and you're kind of like in this arena dome, and so you kind of have like you're immersed in like the space, like a
Hmm.
different kind of setting and whatnot, kind of like sci-fi futuristic setting. But like I feel like the immersion factor, is completely different with CRISPR, because like in CRISPR I'm trying to set up like an atmosphere,
Hmm.
and that one it's a lot more tied to the story. Where as Mecha Ball Arena, it's more tied with the gameplay.
Okay.
Hmm.
Does does the thought process of one of story driven immersion versus gameplay driven immersion, does one come more intuitive to you?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Because I'm a visual thinker. Like I see images and like I can see kind of videos and like a world inside of my head.
Yeah.
And so like with CRISPR, like a narrative game, I can see the narrative play out inside my head
Hmm.
a lot, easier, or it's a lot more visual to me.
Hmm.
Whereas like with like Mecha Ball, I don't really have that. I can see like like I can think of different locations of where to set it at, to make it interesting.
Hmm.
But it's not as deep, in thought
Yeah.
like that one.
It sounds like your brain's still trying to even look at Mecha Ball as a world building exercise. Like what are we here for? What's going on here?
Right,
Yeah,
for
that
sure.
makes total sense. I saw on a Facebook comment that you mentioned that world building comes very natural to you, but long form storytelling is something that you're developing and really learning.
Yeah.
What have you found to be the biggest differences of those two skill sets? Because someone like me, not having thought of that before, would have just assumed it's
Mhm.
kind of the same thing.
Right. Like it's one thing to, like I said, like creating a world, is becomes a lot more natural to me. And then like coming up with an interesting like story to tell that's going to engage people is, another thing.
Yeah.
And so with that, like I feel like it's a lot more trial and error, It's like
Okay.
just because you see something, like a scene play out in your head one way, when you actually go to like create it, it may have a completely different feel to it,
Got you.
and something may not work like you thought it did. So it's kind of like it's like an iterative process, like I'm going to try out this scene. Does it feel right? Does it does it fit the narrative of my game? Does it make sense?
Hmm.
And you're kind of like it's a lot more kind of like critical in terms of like pulling it out, where if it's something visual I can pull it out super easy.
Got you. You
Hmm.
find yourself like that grading scale, I imagine looks a lot like, I mean, I imagine the two build on each other because I have not written a long form story, but I would imagine it's a experience of like you, yeah, this would okay, this is my idea, good guy is gonna turn on best friend or whatever. Okay,
Hmm.
cool. In theory, makes sense. But then once you see it happen, it's like good guy would never actually do that. You've now made good guy like a real person in your head, so their
Hmm.
personality doesn't quite click. Is that kind of what kind of roadblocks you run into?
Yeah, No, for sure. It's that, and it's like kind of narrative, like plot holes.
Hmm.
It's like, oh, I see this scenario playing out here and this scenario playing out here, and then trying to figure out how they get from there to there, and it's like, well, this can only happen if these other things happen first in
Yeah,
order for them to get here.
yeah,
It's like you have to kind of connect the dots in a way that
right,
makes sense.
right. It's really cool to hear the take of someone who's actually building the world, because the
Mhm.
underlying theme is that I'm picking up on is that you have to fully immerse yourself into this creation before anybody else can get, like, you said yourself, you lived in the world for months in your head, and that's such a
Mhm.
cool image to me, that you have like traveled to this unknown area and
Right.
you're charting a map for the rest of us to go and experience it. Like, that's just,
That's cool the way you put
yeah,
that.
dude, like that's such a badass um visual of what someone like you does. That's really exciting. And it
Mhm.
makes all of the auxiliary stuff much more weighted, when you're coming up with what kind of, when you're coming up with like the I don't know, combat system of the game. It's like, okay, well, what
Mhm.
makes sense in this world? This is a very gritty, highly intense world. We need the combat to feel gritty and highly intense. If we're doing the music, it needs to
Right.
feel like it, that's just cool, man. I just appreciate what people like you do in that sense, because world builder is truly a like earned title in that
Mhm.
sense. That's really
Thank
freaking
you.
cool. Do you have any my last couple of questions, do you have any, now that you've experienced developing the games for quite a while, have you picked up any like unsung hero tricks, or like little um repeatable type of techniques that you can use to, like, oh yeah, this will definitely get people in? Like, for example, I can only speak to music and audio, but in
Mhm.
music, something as simple as like, okay, if I make something in mono for 4 measures and then spread it out to stereo, the stereo part by comparison is going to make everyone feel like this just got freaking huge,
All
even
right.
though it's not that big. Do you have any equivalents in your actual dev journeys?
Huh. So in terms of like kind of go-to ways to immerse the player,
Yeah.
so I think for me, the kind of trick to immersing the player is just kind of like for me, it's like not restricting them. It's like I really like, for me, it's designing the levels in a way that, like think of something. I don't know if you played like Dead Space or
Yeah.
Callisto Protocol or something like that,
I
where
haven't
it's
played Callisto Protocol, but I played Dead Space.
so, like, even though they're made by the same developer, they're two completely different styles of games. Where, like, Callisto Protocol, like, it's very linear. It's just like you're just going straight through the game. There's no kind of exploration really. Whereas, like, Dead Space, it's a lot more open.
Hmm.
Um, and for me, I think when I played through Callisto Protocol, like, I didn't get that sense of like you know immersion of through exploration.
Hmm.
It's just like, okay, there's this beat and there's that beat. And so for me, I think when I'm designing my levels, I want to create, a lot of different pathways for the player to go through and have different, encounters through each pathway. And
Okay.
so I think doing that, like, is kind of I guess, my go-to or my mindset towards it.
Okay. So interactivity is your pathway to immersion. You want it to feel like the player's in control of what's happening.
Right.
Because I mean, there are definitely, I haven't played Callisto Protocol, but I know that type of game where there's like really nothing to do but the path, and that feels, those tend to feel more like a ride than a
Yeah.
game. Which, there's a place for that too, but I can totally see that feels less. It's not me. I'm watching this happen to somebody else.
Right.
That
No,
makes
for sure.
perfect sense. Cool, man. Well, I am all out of questions. I have one fun little game question just to see the way your brain
Okay.
works.
Sure.
If if
I have a question for you too.
oh, sick. All right, cool. Um, so you're launching a game, and for whatever reason in this magic world, you have to sacrifice one and supercharge the other of gameplay versus narrative. So either your gameplay sucks and your narrative kicks ass, or your narrative sucks but the gameplay is super fun. Which one do you go with and why?
Man, that's so tough. Like, I think for me, like, as much as I love gameplay and the excitement of it, I feel more engaged. Like I'm thinking a lot more when there's like a narrative that I'm invested in.
Yeah,
So
I would agree.
I guess that would be my choice. Plus, I come from more of like film, animation background, so I guess
Yeah.
I'm a little biased towards that.
Yeah.
But
I would answer the same way. We share the same for the exact same reason. Like the fun gameplay is only fun for so long. Like if I don't care about what's happening, I'm gonna get bored.
for sure.
Yeah.
Mhm. And my question for you is: are you an Aliens fan or an Alien person, or have you even seen those?
I don't. I grew up more in the Lord of the Rings world, so I've seen I've seen the movies, but not enough to have a valid argument. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I was much more a Dungeons and Dragons nerd than I was a sci-fi nerd growing up.
Oh, for sure. I mean, Lord of the Rings classic, like one of the best of all time. Are you a Return of the King or Two Towers guy? How about that?
Two Towers was sick. I liked Two Towers made a bigger impact on me just because of the battle scenes where Gandalf comes back and we're all defending the cat. Like that whole sequence was sick. Return of the King for me, even when I was younger and a huge fan, like that one just dragged on a little more. That one felt kind of like we were really just trying to wrap this up and get this over with. And the whole like has like 17 endings where it fades to black and then comes back and then fades to black and then comes back. So still a phenomenal movie, but that one had more knocks. Two Towers was freaking incredible.
Oh, for sure. I same answer for me. Yeah, can't beat it.
And that was the first movie we really got to see Legolas open up and do some freaking work.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It's like that movie was just top tier.
Oh, dude, legendary.
Absolutely. All right, brother. Well, I really appreciate your time. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up this recording here, but this was a lot of fun, man. I really appreciate you hanging out and chatting with me. For any people who might be listening, where can we follow you, follow what you're doing?
Yeah. So if you want to check me out, you can visit my YouTube channel. It's CRISPR Video Game Official. And then I also have like another YouTube channel where I do tutorials and I'm kind of like working on a combat system and kind of showing off the process of that. And that one is Let's Make Some Games. So yeah.
Cool, man. Well, I will link those in the show notes whenever I post this. And yeah, man, good chatting with you, and we'll talk again soon.
Likewise. Good talking to you, dude.
All right, you guys, thank you so much for watching the first ever episode of Immersion Unlocked. I hope you got some helpful nuggets of information out of that. I hope you found some things that you can apply to your own games. I, for one, loved that tidbit where Clinton shared that he lived in the world for months in his own head for CRISPR before he ever actually got started on the game. I just think that's such a cool exercise that we could all do when we're trying to create something that's going to capture somebody else. We have to immerse ourselves into that world first. What does it sound like? What does it feel like? What are the people like? That's just a really cool mental image for me to picture on how I should approach those things. Be sure to look up Clinton's channels, take a look at his devlogs, take a look at the stuff he's doing at Let's Make Some Games. Clinton is truly one of my favorite people I've met. He's such a super cool dude, so generous with his time, has so much information to share. Highly encourage y'all go check his channels out and reach out to him, say hello. But that's it for this one, guys. I hope y'all enjoyed it. Please be sure to leave your feedback in the comments, positive or negative. I want to make this show as enjoyable and as useful to you guys as possible. And I'm really excited for the journey to see where the show ends up going. So I will see y'all in the next one.